Today on Fortnite, I got second place. I was so close.
Mom, will you get me a snack?
Mom! It's time for adult conversation. With me, your host, Brandy Ferner. Hello, Adult Conversation podcast listeners. On today's episode, I talk with Nora, who is enjoying her midlife renaissance. What's a midlife renaissance, you ask? You'll have to listen to find out, but I can tell you that it includes rule breaking and sex, sometimes with people other than your spouse. It may sound scandalous, but Nora reveals why changing her marriage helped her achieve true happiness, growth, and radical acceptance for both herself and her husband. She also talks about breaking out of the good girl role and how the loss of her father gave her unexpected clarity. So join us for today's episode, which looks at one woman's choice between fulfilling her own deep needs or sticking with her status quo marriage. And we recorded this in the first week or so of the pandemic lockdown, so when we talk about wanting a change or a distraction from what's currently going on, we're referring to the constant news about the coronavirus that was bombarding us at the time, not the uprisings against police violence that have taken place across the world the past couple of weeks. We white people don't need a break from that. Black lives matter. On to the show. Joining me today is an anonymous guest, and once you hear her story, you will understand a little bit about why. So she is a brave friend of mine who, like many of the past guests, have stepped out of her comfort zone and gone against the grain in order to give breath to her authentic self. Nora is going through what she calls a midlife renaissance, and it has a lot to do with sex. She is done being the good girl and wants the freedom to explore new territory and partners. So welcome to the podcast, Nora.
Thank you, Brandy. I'm so excited to be here and talk with you about this fun topic.
Yes, and I'm excited because we're recording this amid the pandemic, and I think both of us are looking forward to talking about something else for a change, right?
Definitely. As I was preparing to connect with you today, I was looking through my journal and, reading a little bit of poetry that's been guiding me on my journey the past few years. And it felt so good just to go inward and to not be paying attention to all the noise of the world right now. It also felt a little bit, I guess I was judging myself for that. It felt a little selfish because I was thinking, oh, what am I missing right now? Should I be, sending an email? Should I be connecting with someone and making sure they're okay? Like often when we're women and mothers and caring for other people, we get drawn out because we have a lot of high expectations for what we should be doing in the world. And so I think this is actually a really beautiful thing for you and I to be doing today, to just take a pause and talk about something else and think about something else and
Yes.
come back to our lives a little bit.
Yes, take us away, Nora. Take us away from everything. So I want to dive into this anonymity piece. So I know that you went back and forth on this, right? I think there was a part of you that wanted to use your name because you wanted to erase the shame surrounding, coming into your own sexually. And then I thought that there was also a part of this that is a secret from your family, hence the lack of name. So tell us more about your thought process here.
Yeah, and it's not so much, keeping a secret from just my family. It's more, I'm still really in the process and I'm still figuring out what it means for me and how to share it, with people that I'm intimately connected to, but also with the world. I think there will be a time when I'm going to be sharing more of this with the world. I've been doing a lot of writing and it's going to happen. It's just that I'm not quite in that place yet. Also, my professional life is important and valuable to me. And, there's just things that I have to consider around that.
For sure, right.
And so I think for now, I'm loving the opportunity to be able to share the story and hopefully help other, parents, moms or dad, men or women, anyone, be able to realize that there is a place and a time for us to connect with what we really need in our lives and explore that and maybe give some courage for that. But it's not as important in this moment that it's like, it's me, it's my name that's doing that. I think getting the message out there is the most important piece. Yeah.
Yeah. I got it. We met up for breakfast months ago. And by the way, if I ever meet you for breakfast out there, anybody, you're probably going to be on the podcast because I feel like so many of these podcasts start with like, we were at breakfast, and maybe there's something about it. Yeah. Where people are, spilling the tea. And then I'm asking like, hey, do you mind if we move the tea over here? Because I think, and it's always from a place of like, I'm awe of, being in awe of people who are doing things that are outside of what they've always done.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing the way that I react to people's stories, I know my listeners would react the same way. And it's like, this is too good. I know that other people are struggling with this or questioning this. So it needs to get to more people. So anyway, even though I know some of the listeners today will be like, whoa, with what we're going to talk about, I also know that the stories that you've shared with me over the years, and the struggles and the insights about this new awakening you've had, they're so relatable at the core. And where it's not relatable, it's just fun as hell to listen to and imagine. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to get to all this today, your midlife renaissance, how your marriage did or didn't weather it, some scandalous stories, hopefully, where this new you is headed and what we can all learn from it. But first, what is something the listeners need to know about you?
I think probably to help create the context for this, something that they need to know about me is that I'm known, as being the good girl, the one who always does the right thing, the one who has the answers oftentimes, the one who people can really depend on. And, as I've been going through this, I'm just thinking of it was a newer friend like a few years ago, when I was sort of right in the middle of things. And she said to me, "Oh, so you're actually a bad girl in good girl clothes." I was like, well, I think the bad girl is wanting to come out. But I think what is important to know about me is, and I think for a lot of us, is that, we and I had certain ways of being in the world, perceptions about myself and perceptions that other people had of me, that I only knew how to keep up with those. I didn't, I wasn't really taught or conditioned on how to break out of them every once in a while and explore the other parts of myself. I was really good at doing what was expected. And at some point that became not sustainable.
Yeah. So are you saying because you were so in your good girl, then this bad girl inside was like, if you're not going to let me out every once in a while, I'm just going to come live at your house for a while.
Yes. And it's not so dramatic as that. I mean, I've definitely explored and tried things sometimes that maybe somebody else wouldn't. But yeah, I mean, the core, the foundation has definitely been this really being comfortable in, who I was because of who other people thought I was supposed to be. And so,
right.
The way that I describe it, and a little bit about this because of what we share and other connections that we have, but my sort of map and the way that I understand my midlife renaissance is as a hero's journey, is as this call to go to a place within myself that I've never been or that I left behind at some point in my life or that I didn't fully explore. And for me, it's not all of me that I didn't explore, but there was definitely the part of me that was a very sexual being that I left in the underworld and that I didn't give as much reference to or respect as much or allow as much exploration because I thought that it wasn't as important as some of these other parts of my being. And I was taught that it wasn't as important as other parts of who I was. And so I made decisions in my life that, didn't keep that maybe in as high a value as some other, parts of who I was. So at some point it became like, for listeners that don't know what a hero's journey is, it's essentially this call to discover a place within ourselves that we have not explored or that we've left behind. And when I hit around 40, the call was literally like, some people call it a Kundalini awakening, but it was like in my yoni, it was like lighting up. I mean, she was on fire every day. I was just totally sexually aroused all the time. I mean, it was unbelievable. And
so you became Samantha from Sex and the City.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yes. Okay. I was like, let's do this. I'm turned on, like, come on, let's have a good time. And my husband was not, he he didn't have that same desire for, sexual exploration that I had. And nor did he ever. And I always had a lot more than he did. But at this point in my life, it became like, okay, this fucking needs to happen. Like now, it's not an option to try to resolve this need with getting more massages or going out dancing, or, I was trying to do all these things to take care of that part of myself without actually taking care of that part of myself,
Right.
And I got like, literally felt like I was going to explode.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so what happened next? Like, I'm curious of the sort of overview for the listeners of your transformation and your story. And like, you gave us an idea of like where this awakening started, which it feels like at 40, there's just, people take less shit. People's yonis are waking up. Like, I feel like at 40, we all get some kind of a call. I think that that's interesting that was happened when you turned 40. When I turned 40, I had the shingles and a kidney stone. So I would much prefer the yoni on fire than the urethra on fire.
Oh no. Yes.
Anyway.
Yoni on fire is much better than urethra on fire. Oh my gosh.
But anyway, what's the like, so tell us the bird's eye view overview of your story.
It actually honestly started with my father dying. So I have a pretty typical midlife, crisis clinical story, or sort of psychological story. I mean, if you look at the textbooks or you read anything about midlife, it was pretty classic. I was 39, my father died. I was finishing my master's degree. I was doing another certification process. All these things were happening in the same year. And simultaneously at my work, I had met a man who really lit my fire. I mean, we were intellectually connected, we were creatively connected, we enjoyed, talking about politics and spirituality and all kinds of things. And, I realized that I was also physically attracted to him. And for the first time in my, at that point, I had probably been married 13, 14 years or so, at that point, it was really the first time that had happened to the level of I was nervous about it. I mean, of course,
right.
as a heterosexual woman, I can walk down the street and, come across a man who I think, oh, he's very attractive, and fine, I go about my day, no big deal. It doesn't impact my everyday life and thinking.
Right.
Or maybe I'll have a little fantasy or something, and that's nice. But, like I didn't feel like it was threatening my marriage, And
Right.
so for the first time in my life, I was grieving my father. I was trying to figure out who I was becoming professionally. My kids had gotten to a stage where they didn't need me as much. They were more physically independent. They were off doing their own things. There wasn't as much of that, like, day-to-day nurturing care that needed to happen all the time. And so it was sort of just that classic midlife experience where I was being, stimulated by this other human and realizing that there were things in my own marriage and my own relationship that I was missing out on and that I wanted to have in my relationship and that I wanted to have with depth. And so I brought that, to that relationship, and I expressed to him everything that was happening. I was very honest and transparent from the get-go. I said, look,
you mean with your husband? You were
with
told
my
him all of
husband.
this. Yeah.
Exactly. I said, look, there's this guy at work, and this is who he is, and this is what's happening for me, and it's scaring the fucking shit out of me. Like, I feel like this is a threat to our marriage, and what can we do about it? Will you help me? Like, be here. What can we do? And, at first he was just a deer in headlights. I mean, I think was shocked. He didn't understand, the intensity of what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
He's just a lot more, neutral about the world in general, and I'm much more passionate. So, there's that disconnect for us there. And he didn't really have a response. That's what was so frustrating for me, was there was no response at all. It wasn't, he didn't seem to be worried or really doing anything about it. He didn't, try to engage with me. And so I felt like I was, the metaphor that I sometimes have in my brain, or the visual, is like I was playing catch, and the other person was just standing there and not trying to even catch the ball or throw it back. I was like, hello,
wow.
like, here,
Yes.
can you open the glove? Can you like give me some feedback? And there was just
right,
nothing.
like it's just hitting his chest and just like dropping.
And then
dropping. He's like, I'm not gonna.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I became discouraged. I became infuriated. I mean, I was everything, all the emotions, and just kept trying lots of different strategies. I love Esther Perel.
Yes, yes,
I had been
yes.
reading a ton of her and tried to, give him things to read or watch. We actually signed up for her online course, which I highly recommend before you enter your midlife crisis. Like, do it. She has a really great course about love and sex and, relationships.
Is that the Rekindling Desire one?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
exactly.
I think I've seen
It's
that
so
go
good.
by. Yep.
It's so good. She's great. So I read a ton of Kim Anami. She's pretty well known around like just your, individual sexual kind of awakening. And she has, again, online courses and stuff, took stuff with her. I mean, when I am faced with a crisis, what I do is I try to learn and grow and like figure shit out,
Yep.
And he was like, and I love him to death. I mean, we're still married. That's another reason why it needs to be anonymous, is because we really haven't, even finished our process for our relationship. But he, I love like who he is and how he processes. It just, at that point in my life, it was really frustrating for me because I wasn't getting, what I needed in order to be able to figure out what I was going through. And I wanted that in my relationship.
And so what was he doing? Like you would give him these things and be like, we should take this class. And then would he willingly be like, yeah, and be excited about it? Or was he like, I'm not really willing to do the work? Like, where was he?
The thing is he was neither, right? So he didn't say,
Oh,
I'm
so like
excited.
apathetic?
Totally apathetic. Yeah, he was super flat about it. He wasn't, honestly, if he had said like, no, I can't do this, it probably would have been easier, because then it would have fucking sucked and I would have been sad, but I would have just gone like, okay, here's the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
So he didn't say, he wasn't in and he wasn't out. He was just like, he was nowhere in between. And so I actually said to him, there was one night where we sat on the couch and, I mean, just tears, it was, I mean, I don't know how many hours and, boatloads of tears I had, but there were a lot, and it was intense. And
Yeah.
he wanted to be there for me. He just didn't know how. And I said to him, I had been reading a lot of poetry, and there was a quote by, Diane Ackerman, and she says, I don't want to get to the end of my life and find that I just lived the length of it. I want to have lived the width of it as well.
Mm.
And I said, that's where I'm at. Like, and I need you to understand that this is where I'm at right now. And he said to me, what if I just want to live the length of it?
Oh, wow. I just got
So,
chills because that's like his
yeah.
truth. Like it's not
Yes.
like that's gosh. Yeah. And that's the
Yeah.
thing is when you have two people who just at the core have a different way of being or what they want out of life, like what do you do with that? And I know you're
Yeah.
here to give us a take on what you guys did with that, but I'm
Yeah.
it's like I'm in awe because everybody always talks about like, well, love can conquer all. And it's like, yeah, but what about stuff like this? That's just
Yeah.
legitimately like a really different alignment in life.
Yeah, exactly. And in that moment, and that was a few years ago, but and I still, like, it's such a visceral experience. Like, it's thinking about it is super emotional. And
Mm.
because I love him so much, and I love that he was able to say that that's his truth.
Yes,
And
right.
also and he didn't attack me for mine. He didn't say, well, I need you to only live the length of it. And I didn't say to him, I need you to live the width of it. I said, this is my truth. And he said, this is my truth. And then we said, what are we going to do?
Mm.
And in that moment, we didn't have an answer outright to each other. I think intuitively we both knew, that at some point this was going to have to change and we were going to have to recreate our relationship, and it was going to need to look different than it did. But we didn't know the first step to take. And so we just, for a while, were in that space of like, okay, this is probably going to end, at least in the way that we know it right now.
Right.
And how do we do that with love? And how do we do it with, taking care of our children? And so I know that was sort of both happening for us, but it was still another couple of years, honestly, before we got to that place of being ready to make that decision. So we continued to live our life. We didn't even really, there were months would go by where we wouldn't really speak of it, but I was having my experience still, and I was still really frustrated, and I still really wanted to have a lot of sex. And, we still would have some interactions. The thing is, too, an important piece of this is I would call it like a borderline sexless marriage. I mean, it wasn't a sexless marriage is defined as, I think, less than 10 times in a year, depending on, what you read, maybe once a month or less than once a month. So there were times in our marriage where it was less than that. There were times where it was a little bit more, but I was always the initiator. I definitely have always been the one in the marriage that had the bigger or had the sex drive and that would initiate, and not just for sex, but I mean, touch in general. Touch is definitely my love language. So I've always been like that, and my husband never, it was the opposite for him. There was a lot of shaming, and he grew up Catholic, and masturbation was a sin. And
I was just going to ask. He's Catholic, probably, right?
yeah, exactly. I'm Protestant, so I'm a good girl, but I'm a little on the edge,
Right.
Or I was Protestant. I'm not Christian at all anymore. But he would do it if I like wanted to, or I really pushed, or I really it felt like actually I was pulling and tugging granite rock. It's like,
right.
Come on, let's try. There wasn't any sort of initiative on his part, and it was like dragging him along. And God, that got really shitty after a while.
Yeah, I would imagine you can only take so much of that.
Yeah, I actually felt pretty rejected, because I felt like, what the fuck is wrong with me that I am a beautiful human? I mean, I'm not saying like necessarily physically beautiful, but
But
I
you
want to
are.
be adored. Thanks. But you know what I mean? Like I was like, God, I have this body that's working really well. She's all juiced up. What's wrong with me that my husband isn't receptive to that? What am I doing wrong? I kept going to that really dark place of, there must be something innately wrong with me if I can't get my husband to want to engage with me sexually to the level that I wanted and that I desired.
Right.
And so it got dark, and I got sad. And then at the same time, I would go to work, or I'd go out dancing, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm jazzed up. And I'd be getting feedback, right, from other men, like, oh,
Right.
this person wants to engage with me, and that person wants to engage with me. Or they give me a compliment or tell me I'm beautiful or whatever, which I always, thankfully, I've never had anything like negative happen to me in that way. It's always been really, just gentle and safe and complimentary,
Nice.
which I
Yeah.
appreciated, because I wasn't getting that, at home.
Real fast, you mentioned something about the adoration here, and I wanted to make
Yeah.
sure that we talked about this because it was one of the pieces that sort of blew me away when we were talking about it at breakfast. When you were talking about the loss of your dad and your
Ugh.
dad's role in your life, I remember you were saying that your dad was this figure who would see you, would come over and adore you, obviously in a non-sexual way, but in a like, look at all that you do, and he was just in awe of you. So will you remind me and tell the story about that whole piece?
Yeah, that was definitely, it's been a significant part of my midlife, journey or crisis or renaissance, because I did have a good relationship with my dad. He, obviously he was a man in my life. And so there was that element, this masculine, feminine sort of dynamic, right? Of just,
Yeah.
he was also very capable. So for me, he was the epitome of this divine masculine. He was artistic and articulate and intelligent, and he was an engineer. He could just do anything. He could fix things. He was a beautiful artist. So I, as often we do as girls and women who have good relationships with our fathers, we can hold them on pedestals. It's very
Sure.
typical. And so, so in many ways I did. And it took time to get to that place, because when I was a little girl, the relationship was actually horrible, because he was drinking a lot, and he and my mother had an awful relationship, and they fought a lot. And so there was this like really bad place, and then there was this really good place, that we got to. And he did adore me, and he became the kind of person that was able to express that, which he wasn't able to do when we were little kids, but he definitely was able to do that when we were adults. And he lived in another state, and so when he would come to visit, I had this red chair in my kitchen, and he would sit in the red chair while I would be cooking and taking care of the kids and spending my life in the kitchen, as we do when we have young children.
Yep.
And he would just, he'd kind of cock his head to the side, and he had these big brown eyes, and, he'd just smile, and he'd watch me and exude adoration for me, and tell me with his words, like, you're so beautiful. You're so wonderful. You're such a fabulous mother. How do you do what you do? Look at you. You're amazing. How'd you whip that whatever dish up that I just whipped up so fast. And, like,
Yeah,
he was
right.
just the sweetest, and I received that from him. And I actually really became to depend on him for that in my life. He was not just the man, but the person who in my life, gave me that adoration. And I didn't realize how valuable it was until he wasn't there anymore. And when he
Yeah.
died suddenly and very young, he was 67, um,
Mm.
I felt, I mean, of course, had the initial grief, but over that year, after he was gone, David White, who's a beautiful poet who I love and who has helped me so much in these past few years with his writings, talks about the death of his mother. And he writes a farewell letter. And essentially, it's the letter that she wrote to him after she died. It's him
Oh, right,
imagining
right.
what she would have said, right,
Ah,
and writing it. And it's so
right.
darling. And I did the same for my dad when I was visiting San Diego, where he used to live. I sat and wrote his farewell letter, to me,
Mm.
being inspired by David White. But what he says about it is that when someone that we love dearly dies, we don't realize what that relationship is until it's not there anymore, or maybe a key element of that relationship, and we spend those first few years falling into that place that they held for us, and we fall and we fall and we fall and we fall into that place that they held for us until we finally land and really realize what it is. And then he says the task is to find that within ourselves and within the world, you know?
Mm.
And like,
Wow.
I mean, my heart right now even is just really feeling into that, because it is such a journey, and I don't always know exactly where to pull from for myself, my own adoration for myself, and
Yeah.
where sometimes to get it in the world. And I think initially, Brandy, what happened for me is that when I realized that I wasn't receiving that from my father and that he wasn't there to give that to me, and I felt the deep, deep loss of it, I turned to my husband, and I wanted to get it
Right.
from him. And I said, and
Right.
I even told him, I remember another time sitting on the couch, we have this little corner of the couch where we have had all these conversations. And I remember sitting and saying to him, God, I'm like craving men. I'm craving this masculine energy in my life. I'm craving someone to hold me. I wanted to like get on the back of a Harley and just, ride off into the woods. I don't like ride off down the road, or, and I wanted him to be the one to do that, for me. And I
Right.
probably put a lot of pressure on him, to do that, because I didn't know where else to go, and how to do it for myself.
Right.
But yes, that's what my father provided for me. And my task now, and I think one of the things that I want, other women and all people to know when they are faced with, exploring something that they're scared about or that they don't understand, is that it often is a task to fall back in love with ourselves, or to fall in love with ourselves,
Mm.
and that's when my husband and I did finally decide that we weren't going to have the same format of a relationship that we have, or not be married and live in the way that that we had been living, and kind of readjust that. When we finally decided to do that, um, what I told him and what I realized is that my journey is really about falling in love with myself. It's not so much about
Mm.
trying to change something in him, or even necessarily just about the relationship. It really has so much to do with me falling in love with myself, and also being totally what's the word, I guess, in that, like, I think people refer to it as radical acceptance,
Oh,
of
right.
who he
Yes.
is, as well, right? So like
Right.
completely accepting who he is as a person, and accepting who I am as a person, and really falling in love with who I am as a person, instead of trying to force a relationship that isn't lining up.
Man, and it makes me think too that when you lose somebody close to you in life, the relationships that you have, maybe some of those can be not totally fulfilling because you have this cast of characters that altogether fulfills you. But then when you lose people, like you're saying, that loss and that hole is so obvious that maybe what somebody else was lacking that this other person gave, all of a sudden we're switching our attention to, like, I need for you to give this to me, to somebody else. And if they're not able to do that, that's then a tough situation. So I wonder if other listeners have had situations like this where they've lost people, even more than one person, where maybe it illuminates some of the cracks in other relationships when when you don't have the quite as big a cast of characters in your life anymore.
Definitely, especially parental loss, because there's just so many layers there. We are in many ways still children, when we're with our parents. And so when they die, there's the grief that we're having internally as a child. There's the grief that we're having internally as an adult, child. There's the grief we're having internally as maybe within the friendship in that relationship. So there's like all these layers of it.
Right.
So I think especially for those relationships, if they've lasted into our adulthood, which, I'm blessed that both of my parents, those relationships have lasted into adulthood for me. I think it's important to do that, to look in other places, to find it elsewhere in the world, and also to explore the internal relationships that we have, within ourselves. Like, how do I also know that I am adored and I don't necessarily need to hear that from another human being?
Yeah.
Like how
Wow.
can I
Right.
remind myself that that is the truth, regardless of whether somebody says it to me, that I am adored and that I am valuable.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It is. And I can't say that I'm there 100%. I know that it's part of what's happening for me, is that I'm needing to explore that.
Well, so with your husband, this recreating of the relationship. So take us back there. So you know that you guys are not on the same page, and you're starting to realize like he's not going to give you what this part of you really needs. And there's this super hot dude at your work that you're feeling very like uh-oh about. So bring us back there. What happened there? Did you end up making that choice and crossing that line? What happened?
Yeah, so that person at work actually ended up leaving, and relocating to another city, and we stayed in touch and texted and saw each other once in a while when he would be around, but we maintained it as a friendship. I actually had expressed to him as well my feelings for him and my concern, and kind of some of the things that I was struggling with in my life, and he at the time was like, yeah, I really just see it as a friendship. And I was like, okay, well, that makes it easier. Later on, he ended up telling me that that wasn't the case, but at any rate.
Wow, so there's still like games, like adult men still play games.
Yes.
Good to know.
It's ridiculous. I'm sure women do too. Not me,
Yes.
though. But no, so I think that it came from a place of protection, honestly. I think that, he didn't want to engage in that for a variety of different reasons. And that's
Sure.
fine. And I respect that. But simultaneously, I was doing my thing. So one of the things that I would do that I thought was really helpful to sort of activate this need in me to feel very sexual was go out dancing. So I was going out dancing with friends, and we would do this, once or twice a month. And initially, my husband was super supportive of it because, it was my time away and whatever. Again, I was at that stage in my life where I was finally getting to have a little bit of freedom from the kids, and
Yeah, right.
so I'd go out and do that. And so important. And I know many of your other people that you've interviewed have, discussed that as well when it comes to parenting, like finally getting to that place where you can go out on a Friday night and, it's fine if both partners aren't home to put the children to bed, and, like all that
Yes.
feels so good, right? To get to
So
that place.
good.
So
Yes.
good. So I was doing that and, just meeting people, right? Men and women, and just having a good time, very casual, just people out dancing kind of, there tends to be like regulars when you start to do this sort of thing. If you go out
Okay.
dancing and stuff, there tends to be the just regular crowd that's there, right? That you connect with. And so I was doing that and definitely getting some positive feedback, from men that I was meeting, and as far as like them just being attracted to me and expressing that. And again, that felt really good, but it still felt, for a while, it still felt like it was containable, I guess. I wasn't worried. But at some point, there was this threshold that I crossed that I really realized that I needed more. And if I wasn't going to get it in my marriage, maybe I would need to have that outside of my marriage. And, initially I can't even say that it was super conscious. I mean, the thoughts would come and go. And I actually even spoke with my husband about having an open marriage. I didn't even have the concept of that, honestly, until right around that time that my dad died. I had a few friends that were sharing with me about having open marriages and about being polyamorous, having different partners. And I literally was like, I mean, it was a concept, but it wasn't anything that I thought people actually did that.
Right,
I was
right.
like,
Yeah.
people, you can actually wait, you can actually do that.
Right.
I remember feeling like such a child, like, oh,
Like they
wow,
let you?
okay,
Like,
yeah, like
yeah.
exactly, like people let you do this, like you're allowed to do this, I mean,
Right.
my jaw must have just hit the floor. Um, so then I was like, oh, well, okay. So I started Googling it. I started looking, watching TED Talks about it. I started again reading about it and bringing it to him. And he was like, are you fucking out of your mind? He goes, I could lose my job. Like I mean, there's no way in hell. Like, and that's what, it wasn't even, he never even said like, well, I don't want you to be with someone else, or, I really love you and I don't want to share you. It was nothing like that. It was like, I could lose my job. What are we going to say to the kids? Like,
Mm,
there's no way, he wasn't on board. So
mm.
I was like, oh, what am I going to do with this? So of course, one of the things that not of course, but one of the things that happened for me when I was going out is I started drinking more. So I'd never have been someone to like drink or use drugs. I mean, I never even tried marijuana until I was, I don't even know, around the age of 40. Like obviously the shit started.
Perhaps was I there? Perhaps was I
Perhaps
there?
you probably were. Yeah.
I was.
It was
I
right
You
around
maybe
that
don't
time.
remember it, but I do. And it was
Oh my
the
God,
best.
that's right. Yes. So right, exactly. I mean, and hello, that's just insanity too. Just thinking about that. That was another good girl part of me was like, no drugs, no, no booze, I mean, I would drink here and there, a couple glasses of wine, but even as a college student, I never partied. The professional track that I was on was very demanding, and I needed to get through those 4 years of school, and I needed to do them successfully. And,
Right.
there was no way that I really had time for it. It's how it was at that point in my life. So that was the other element around my midlife, renaissance, was sort of letting loose in these other ways, right? That I had never done before. And
Yes,
so,
and in that moment,
yeah,
real fast, in that moment when we were together, it was like girls gone wild. Like the glow and energy that was coming off of you when it was like you realized. I think you had just like cracked the door open on all this, and you were just like, I'm
yes.
gonna yes, like I'm saying yes to everything. Like fuck this old
Yeah.
life, fuck this old way of being. Like I'm saying yes to life, and it was so beautiful because it was like it was seeing this person for the first time really tap into that, and the amount of joy you had over it was
Right.
just awesome.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Like
Yeah,
I'm
it was
exuding
great.
joy just thinking about it. And I remember one of the pieces of that, and I remember this, is someone asked us a question of what we're seeking, and it had to do
Mm.
with like three or four different categories, and mine
Oh.
was oral sex. I was like, I'm seeking oral sex. And they were like, that's in the love category. So
So then you were
add a
saying
little
that you were
drinking into
drinking?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so there was one night where a friend ended up having, just like a party at her house after we had gone out dancing and stuff. And yeah, so that was the first time that another man, touched me and was sexual with me for however many years, had been a long time.
Wait, real
And
fast, when that happened, was there like did you consciously like, okay, I know I want this to happen and I know I've avoided this, but in this moment I don't care what happens, like I'm just going to enjoy this, or was it so fast? Like what was that initial crossing the line moment?
yeah, I kind of had gotten to the place where I knew that I was setting myself up for the potential for it to happen.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wasn't doing anything to prevent that, right? So I was conscious enough about that.
Right.
Um, I didn't actually get to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this with this person and that's how it's going to go down,
Yeah.
but there was a person that I had become more, friendly with, and we were sharing, things that were going on in our lives. And oftentimes when this happens, there's people who are both in marriages that are, experiencing the same thing, lack of
Sure.
sex or, whatever. And so they share that, right? And they get sort of intimate about those things, and they have that in common with each other, and that
Which like fuels the whole thing,
it
right?
totally
Yeah.
fuels the whole thing. Yep.
When two people are like, I'm
Exactly.
trying not to do this, but I need this. Yeah. And then the other one's like,
Exactly.
me too. And then they're like, we're doing
Exactly.
this.
And
Yeah.
then let's do it together. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it was also really nice to be in a place where I where I actually wasn't the initiator, because
Oh,
in my marriage, I was the initiator sexually, and not just the initiator sexually, I was the initiator for everything. Like you've talked about in many of your podcasts, as a mom, I initiate things around the children for their school. I initiate all of their health care. I make sure that we have the fucking groceries. I make sure that the bills are paid. I'm the one that's
right.
thinking about vacations. I'm the one that's begging my husband to take a vacation. I'm the one that's, literally every single category in our life that needs decision making, I'm initiating and I'm decision making around it, right?
Right,
I
right.
mean, he's going to work and he's doing his thing and he's bringing home, resources for us, which is beautiful. And I'm very grateful and it's wonderful. And he likes what he does and he's good at what he does. But every other fucking category was me.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
to be in a situation where I let myself not be in control and not be in charge for a brief moment in time was one of the most freeing experiences I've ever had.
Mm,
And I had been having so much anxiety, like my chest had been tight, my belly had been tight, I'd been having a hard time breathing, in part because I was scared that this was going to happen, in part
right.
because I knew that something needed to change in my marriage, in part because I had been overloaded with the stress of motherhood and workinghood and all that stuff, right? Like, so I was a pot boiling over, literally. And in that moment, he took me and loved on me and touched me in ways that made my body feel fabulous. And I completely let go of all of my, thoughts and my anxieties and anything that I had been in charge over and control of. And it felt so incredibly fucking amazing. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, yeah, this definitely needs to happen. Like I mean, there was zero guilt, honestly, Brandy, to be completely transparent. I
Well,
mean,
I
I
remember
had
asking
none.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember asking
had
you.
none.
And yeah, and I think it's like it sounds like in that moment you got that clarity you needed, which this isn't just about the sex and the
Yeah,
touch. Like there's something bigger here that is going on that needs to change. Like it seemed like that there was the clarity that was brought was like worth that. And so then you didn't have the guilt attached because you now knew something that you couldn't have known had you not done it.
exactly. That's exactly right. Yep. And now that it's a few years out, I look back and say, is there another way I could have gone about it and done it? But hindsight is 2020. And
Yeah.
when we're in it, we're in it. And I don't know, I'm sure that there's many people who may listen to this and say, well, then you have a fucking character flaw, girl, or, you must be, not a very good person, or, how dare you for not getting out of the marriage before you engaged in that. But I don't know. I don't know how to answer that or what to say to someone who may say that to me. I guess for me, knowing that I had done everything that I could possibly do to that point in my marriage to help him understand what I needed and to be as transparent as I could possibly be with what was happening for
Yeah.
myself. I mean, I
Right.
told him, I'm afraid I'm going to have an affair. What should we do about this? Like, help me. I mean, we had gone to counseling and stuff. I was going to individual counseling. So it's not that we weren't doing things. It's not that I wasn't being upfront with him and trying. I didn't say that night when I left to go dancing, oh, I'm probably going to go fuck somebody else tonight. That
Right.
wasn't like my intention that night. But I also know that I wasn't, preventing myself from doing that. And I think that in many ways it's because I needed to have happen what happened. Like that is my journey. And
Mm,
it was needed just like whatever experiences we have, how we sometimes look back and say, well, that was really hard and I wouldn't have necessarily chosen it that way. But now look what I have from it, look at what's
right.
going on as a result and look at all the awareness that I have or whatever.
Well, how did you like when did you tell your husband? Was it immediate? Did you not tell him for a while? And then how did that go? And what happened after you told him if you did?
Yeah, so I didn't tell him right away. I felt like I didn't really need to. Honestly, I felt so justified because of everything that I had been trying to do and how transparent I had been with him. I kind of was in a place of like, look, I'm putting in 99%, you're putting in 1%. So this is what I need and I'm going to be doing it. Like, I'm going to do
Right. And
it,
like I've told
and
you and you're not checking
yeah.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was
Mm,
kind of in that
yeah.
space, which isn't great. You know what I mean? You don't want to be in that space in a marriage. And I don't want or in any relationship. Like you want to be transparent and let people know what's happening and recreate the rules, but I was working to recreate the rules and I wasn't getting a whole lot of, feedback on that.
Right.
So for a little while, honestly, it felt like sex with my husband got a little better. I felt a little bit more, it's almost like it was marriage preserving. And
Hmm.
Esther Perel talks about this too, actually. She says that, I mean, everything that I've read from her, I'll read it and I'll say, oh God, yes, that's exactly how it was for me. So it feels like she's the one person in the world who is speaking to this experience in a really honest and authentic way that is not only shaming, the person who has had the affair. She really looks at it from this holistic mindset and says, what's going on in the entire relationship that's causing this particular outcome, or that's causing this to happen. It's not just a character flaw, right? It's like there's all these
Right.
elements to it. And she says that when somebody is engaging in a relationship outside of their marriage or outside of their whatever relationship they're in that they have rules around or agreements around, when they're breaking those agreements in another relationship, she says that people are not so much looking for something outside of the marriage as they are looking for something within themselves. I'm paraphrasing, but
Yeah.
something to that extent, right? And so that's what I was looking for in myself, was to awaken that sexual part of me and to not have that be left so behind or left
Mm.
out. And also I was looking for that part of myself to not have to be in control. So
Yes.
I didn't tell him, and for a while it actually sort of freed me up to just feel a little more like I had a little more in me to give to the marriage and the relationship and the family, because this other need was being met. And so that went on, for a little bit. The other person and I would see each other like once a month or so. And it really felt like it was preserving. It was helping me feel sane. My anxiety was gone. Yeah, I was feeling like there was a part of me that my needs were met in other ways that they hadn't been being met for so long. And so that freed me up to take care of other things without being so stressed out about it.
Right, like you were really filling your cup like how you wanted
Yeah,
it to be filled.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Gosh, that's such a
Um,
hard thing though, because it's like, like I can imagine people listening are and just even thinking about it is like, okay, so you're getting your cup filled how you need it filled, which makes you a better wife and a mother, but it's with somebody outside of your marriage, like
mhm.
just the complicated nature of those things, which we'll get into in a second, but this idea about monogamy, and you have to choose between two things here, I guess is what I'm getting at, which is it sounds like you have a choice where it's you either have all these things coexist, or you have to choose between your marriage at the expense of your soul, or then you have to choose your soul at the expense of your marriage. Like, unless all the people are on board with having some sort of blended, non-traditional open thing, how can this work if those are the needs and those are the costs?
Exactly. And that's what I would go around and round and round in my mind every day. And it
Yeah.
really did feel for me at some point that it was a decision between my soul and my marriage. And
Mm.
not just the sex piece, but just who I was, like being authentically who
Yeah.
I was as a person. Clearly I wanted to be, and again, it became so much more about just, you know, it wasn't just about the sex. It was like I wanted to be engaging with people who I could dive in with deeper conversations or, explore the world. And my husband and I also just didn't have that part in our lives. We were very good parents together. We were really good at like managing day-to-day stuff. We were great hosts for the rest of my family. When he and I, first connected, the needs that we were meeting in each other were needs of, people in their early and mid. He was in his late 20s. I was in my early 20s when we met. And those needs were very different than what our needs are now, right? As
Right.
adult
Right.
humans who've continued to develop as we should, through our
Right.
through our adult stages. And so I was coming to know that I had all these other needs and all these other desires and wants. The sexual piece was the stimulus, right? It was the thing that set me off on the journey. But ultimately, I became more aware of my whole self and all of me that really was needing to be explored, and just stepping in to who I really want to be for the rest of my life and in the world.
Yeah, and I remember you saying something about how in your family there had been a history of not great guys in some of the
Mm,
relationships. And so it was sort of this thing that was downloaded into you about marry a good guy, marry a good guy. And so you totally did that. And then you realized if you marry the nice guy, you also have sex with the nice guy. And you also do the rest of your life with the nice guy. And so I think there's something so real about what you're saying about our agreements around who we're going to pick and the ages that we pick them, but then not even knowing, like, the 40-year-old Nora, like, what does she want versus the 20-year-old, and what agreements are different. And then when those things don't line up, having to really rectify that with both of you.
Exactly. Yep. So as a 20-something-year-old, I needed safety and I needed security and I needed stability and I needed somebody who was really, grounded in just like I needed loyalty, right? I grew
Yeah.
up in a home where my father had an affair, and I decided as a little girl at 10 years old that I would choose a man who was going to be loyal, and be safe and secure because in that moment there was a lot going on, a lot of conditioning happening, and a lot of me taking in some really rigid rules and agreements around who I was supposed to be as a woman and as a mother.
Yeah.
And one of the most important ones was that I was not to be selfish. Selfish is bad and taking care of other people is good. And there really isn't anything in the middle. It's like this or that, right? And
Right.
so, yeah. And I know like so many of your guests have also spoken to that thread that that's like, as women, we're so conditioned to be givers and martyrs, really, And
Yes.
so I got to a place where I was like, okay, this does feel really selfish and awful, and I'm beating myself up for it. And also, it's important and good and needed. Like I'm figuring out who I am, and that's not selfish. That's self-development.
Right.
I need to be doing this so that I can understand who I am in the world. And if I continuously leave these parts of myself out, who am I really serving? I'm not happy if I'm doing that. Therefore, I'm not probably being the best mom that I can be. I'm not living in this body to the full extent that it can, and that's beating me up. So
Yes.
yeah, so our needs were really different, at that stage, and I was working to understand the rules and agreements that I had been raised with and conditioned with, and this need to be with a man who is very safe and secure and loyal was a need. And it's not that it's not anymore. It's just that it's more expansive now. I have other needs now. And I don't. I mean, it is true. I don't need as much security and safety, right? Like I can provide for myself in many ways. I can take care of myself. And I recognize that there's lots of things that I can do in the world to get all my needs met. I don't have to just choose a man who meets these particular qualities, right? It
Right.
can be more expansive. And not that that's a reason to like all of a sudden just blow up a marriage either. I don't want it to make it sound like it was that simple, because it's not.
Yeah. Right.
Like we sometimes are becoming more aware of what our needs are as we grow. And sometimes those still line up with each other and sometimes they don't. And I think that what I want for myself and for my children, and, when I talk to friends, and what I would encourage other people to do is to check in with that. Where are you at now in your life and in your relationship? Is what you needed still what you need now? Or is there something new and different? And can it happen together? And it can. It happens all the time.
Yes, and having the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Just have the conversation, right? And sometimes marriages can do that. They grow together, and the needs and the ability to be able to meet the needs continue to morph and grow at the same time and in different ways, but right? Like they do in so many relationships.
Yes.
So ultimately I did end up telling him, that I had an
Okay.
affair, because I got to a place where I was like, look, this isn't sustainable. Like I'm not going to continue in a marriage and be with other people. Like the marriage either needs to be open, or it needs to not exist in the same way that it does, or not, or not be a marriage, right? Because
Right.
this is something clearly that's going to happen in my life, and it's not. And also, it was like, well, maybe I just need this one little thing, and then it'll resolve. And that wasn't happening either,
Right.
This
Yeah,
wasn't
that
going to
was that
go away.
clarity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't. This isn't just going to go away. Like this is actually a journey that I'm just beginning, and it's not going to go away because I give it like a little bit of attention. Like it needs a whole lot of fucking attention, and it needs it now. And I deserve that, and I want that, and I was totally done with being not selfish. Like I was like, this, bring it on. Again, like I don't want to get to the end of my life and have only lived the length of it. So I
Yeah.
finally shared it with him, and he was devastated and sad and angry and all the things that you would expect. So we explored a little bit more about open relationship. Like I think he really wanted to do it for me. He wanted to, which I admire, but like I needed him to buy in for himself. I needed him to be okay with it, because otherwise it would have just been me trying to convince him of it for the rest of my life. And that
Right.
didn't feel okay either.
Yeah, and knowing that that wasn't his thing, but he was bending so far, it's like, no, I want you to enjoy this too, and not just
Yeah, and
be
he didn't
coming
even go that
along.
far, really. We'll just be honest. Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't totally like, I want this for you. It was more like, oh God, I sort of have to do this. And so, you know what I mean? It was like from
Yeah.
that sort of energy, which just did not feel good, because I did not want to be dragging him along,
Yes. Right.
Um, and so then there was another relationship that I was engaging in that,
Did you guys
um,
separate though, real fast after that happened? Was he like,
no,
well, then we
nope.
should separate?
No, it was another like good year that we were still together. And again, just sort of trying to figure things out. And, we'd talk about it, and then we'd go 3 months without talking about anything, and just living our lives like people do, and taking care of the
And then
kids.
when
And
you'd go out, would he know? Would he be like, I know what's going to happen here? Or was he kind of in avoidance of it?
yeah, I mean, it would shift. He would kind of want to do open relationship. He would agree to talk to somebody about it or go to counseling. And he's like, yeah, I'm looking for a counselor. And then 3 months would go by and be like, so did you find the counselor? No, I need to look into that. So
Yeah.
like that kind of thing would happen all the time with like everything. I remember at one point a counselor saying to him with me there, what do you think it is that's preventing you from doing any of this, like taking the next step or learning something or making an appointment or whatever it is? And he was like, I don't know. I don't know. So again, I think, he's the kind of guy that's just like, he just wants to live a really simple life. He wants to come
Yeah.
home and watch ESPN and play a couple games with the kids and have dinner and do his things and go to bed and get up and run the rat race again, and he's
Right.
content doing that, and it's okay. Again, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it's just not what I can do with my life. Like, I'll shrivel up and die.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, so I ended up having another relationship with someone that I had known for a long time. And that one really was the catalyst for me of, it lit my fire to say, yeah, I need to get out of my marriage, like, or we need
Mm.
to separate, at least physically.
What was it about that?
Oh God. It was kind of like the relationship that I had had with the man at work, in that it was very stimulating, like in all areas. And then it also became sexual on top of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, it covered all the check boxes. And I started wondering, boy, do I really want an open relationship or to be poly, or do I just want like this level of depth? Clearly I was in a place of needing to explore all this, and I couldn't do it while I was in my marriage. It
Mm.
wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to me, and it just wasn't lining up.
Yeah.
So that was a little over a year. It was like a year ago Christmas time that we decided finally that we would separate. And, it was devastating. I mean, I mostly did a lot of the crying, and he wasn't particularly heartbroken, or maybe he just doesn't have that level of emotion that I have, or maybe he just had already come to terms with it with himself. I mean, I've really only seen him get emotional, even like when his own dad died. I don't even really remember him crying. Like, he's not super, in touch with all that part, or he just doesn't, he never learned how to express it, or it's not okay for him to express it because of his
Right.
conditioning. I mean, I don't know, but he also isn't willing to explore that, right?
Right.
So yeah, so I had some dark days, and there were nights that I would go to work. My job was like 90 minutes away, and I would just cry like literally the entire time in the car on the way home,
Oh
feeling like I
man.
was just losing everything, and what the fuck had I done? But also knowing that there wasn't a way out, that there wasn't an
Right.
alternative,
Like you
like,
couldn't stay like that. Like it seems like so obvious to you that like I cannot live like this, but also
yeah.
the destruction of everything had to
Yes,
be so
yes,
hard.
yes, yes. And
Ugh.
being scared from my extended family, because they depend on us so much, and what's it going to do for them and the kids and all those things. I also am just super aware while I'm going through this that so many people, women and men and all people, might be experiencing this inner turmoil and don't have a way out, don't have an
Right.
alternative decision to
Right.
make. And how fucking grateful I am that that we are in this place where we can decide what's best for our life and how to line that up for ourselves. And part of me sort of struggles with that, because like then I have guilt, like, well, you should, other people have to stick it out, you should too.
Mm,
And I go to that
right.
place. But I think ultimately it's like, okay, if I'm doing the thing that is the most fulfilling for my life, then I can be the best I can be for other people and continue to help the world in the best way that I can. So that's maybe that's me rationalizing it, but that's the approach that I take.
I remember you saying something about how you, and this is like what one of my other guests said on a podcast was, feel like it's worse for kids to grow up with an unfulfilled mom than to have you stay and stick it out and nothing changes for them, but you're like dead inside.
Yeah, and I'll add to that and say that I think that it's not great for kids to grow up in a situation where the adults in their life are not being authentic with who they are,
Yes, right. Yes, yes, yes.
right? And so it's because I'm actually a great mom. Like, I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
I, I've been able to, through my own shit, somehow I've been able to be really present for them. I've been able to do what I need to do for them. I never actually felt like it was negatively impacting my ability to be a good mom. I have my moments. I mean, God, I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but that part of my life I actually feel really freaking solid about. Thank God.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Part of it I think is because I am fulfilled in so many other ways. Like I've always had my professional life, and I've done other things for myself, that I think they see me being who I am in the world, and so that does help, right? But
Yes.
as my kids are teenagers now and embarking on romantic relationships of their own, and thinking about sex and casual sex and monogamy and marriage and all these things, my most important thing for them is that I want them to be able to move through all relationships, but especially intimate relationships, with, authenticity and with open communication, and not have to feel like they are, I don't know, responsible or obligated to another person's happiness, in any way.
Right. Yeah, such a good
Um,
point.
yeah, so I think that I wanted them to see that. I wanted them to see that he and I could find a way to figure this out in a way that was loving and compassionate for each other and true to who we were individually, right?
Right.
Our world is just so messed up when it comes to relationships needing to change. And I think that sometimes they just need to fucking change. Like they need
Yeah.
to not be what they were 10 years ago. And why is that a problem? It's only a problem because our conditioning tells us it's a problem, because Christianity tells us it's a problem, or because, our social structure tells us it's a problem. It's not actually a problem. The problem is the rules that we have around it. And I want my kids to move from a place of understanding that those are rules that come from conditioning and from social structure, not from really what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, for sure.
So when we made the decision, we brought it to the kids, and really simply, he stated that we weren't going to live together as a married couple anymore. And that was pretty much what we told them. We tried not to use a lot of words or, go into detail.
And then what was their reaction? Were they just like shocked? Had they seen it coming at all?
We don't fight, so I don't think they were really ready or thought that it was going to happen. But we did go to family counseling, and the counselor asked them if they were surprised. And they both said that they weren't surprised that it happened. They just didn't think it would happen as soon as it did.
Oh, that's fascinating that they
Yeah.
like knew.
They're both pretty introspective kids, actually. They're really mature, and they definitely saw that we were really, really, really different in so many ways, that we had like pretty separate lives, in a lot of ways. And so I think that they probably wondered, like, how's this going to go? And so they weren't really surprised.
Yeah.
I worked in like afternoon evenings, quite a bit when they were younger. And so we've always been in that sort of divide and conquer, mindset
Yes,
with the
right.
kids, where it's like, or ships passing in the night kind of a thing. And so they've always been really used to spending lots of time just with him and lots of time just with me, and then some
Yeah.
time with all of us together.
Right.
And the time with all of us together is like, okay, it's fine. We have had family vacations that we really enjoy and stuff like that. But honestly, they seem to really enjoy the time that they have just with him and just with
Oh.
me. And
Yeah.
and it's
Huh.
always been that way. And so it also was sort of natural for our family to, as we made this shift, even though he was in a different physical space, and certainly there were challenges with that, again, as some of your other guests have spoken about, but there was a little bit of an element for us that was like, it was already just part of how we were functioning. So it wasn't as huge of a shift as it might be maybe for some other kids, whose environments are different.
Right.
And then we've really done a good job at keeping them doing family things together still. So, we've hosted all the family holiday things, like with the extended family for the past year here at the house. We wanted to keep that first year pretty sort of status quo and not really
Right.
change up a
Normal.
lot of the traditions and things like that. And he and I can be together. We have dinners together, especially now with the pandemic and, not having dance class and not having baseball and not having all those things that we would normally be dividing and conquering for. We're together and there's a few nights a week that we'll have dinner together, or I'll bring dinner over to his house or he'll come here. And, so it's fine. Like, we are a loving family and we're still a family. It's what's changed is our marriage has changed, but our family is still a family,
Gosh, that's such an
so
important piece right there.
yeah,
Wow.
it is.
Yes.
And I'm having a good time, like I'm
Yeah,
having
let's talk
fun
about
and I
that
have
for a minute.
lovers and I have
Yeah. Okay. What?
You're going to cut all the rest of this out and we'll just talk about that. You'll be like, chop all the rest of it.
Well, there's so much to this. There's like,
I know, there's
all
so many
that
threads.
real logistical family agreements, how you got there. And then there's
Yeah.
this scintillating part, which is that, like, what the hell is it
so
like
yummy.
to have been, okay, you already said it. I was going to say, what is it like to be a dutiful wife and mother for over a decade? And then all of a sudden you have like these lovers in different areas. Like, you got hoes in area codes, male hoes in area codes. But like, okay, so walk us through that just like a little bit so people can get this like fantasy trip that they're here for.
the new Nora.
Yes.
So yeah, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. And it feels so whole for me. So I currently have, I guess, maybe 5 lovers. Well, maybe 4. I kind of dumped one, broke up with one recently, but it had to do with his voting record, really. I mean, I just couldn't.
That was a smart choice, by the way.
Thanks.
How do you even juggle 5, though? Like, I know that they don't all live in the same area, but that seems like a lot of management.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's, so there's one who is like literally on the other side of the country. So that's only happened a few times.
Okay.
So there's that. And then there's like occasional texting and things like that, just kind of keeping in touch. I mean, I guess, so I'm on like dating sites, I'm on ways to like meet people, obviously.
Okay.
But some of them have just, initially it happened just sort of more fluidly, like just because I knew people from being out or whatever. The initial few relationships that I had actually were people that I had known for a while in my life that then became sexual relationships. So that was actually kind of a nice and sort of a safe way, I think, for me to start.
Yeah.
Because I knew them, I knew
dip
people
your
who
toes
knew
in.
them. Yeah. And I felt, already felt connected to them and safe and things like that. As I've progressed in the past year, I've had situations that were super casual, like just kind of like meet, go to dinner, have sex, never see you again. There's been like 3 of those. And I kind of feel like
sorry to interrupt you. Is that something where like on the app it's just very clear, like when you're swiping, I don't know how this works, but like when you're swiping people, I know that there's swiping involved, and then when you make the match, right? And then you chat, are you like, "Hey, are you DTF?" And then the person's like, "Great, I'm so stoked you are too. I was hoping you weren't somebody who wanted something more." And then you're like, "I'll see you at wherever. I'll see you at Applebee's at 5 p.m." Like, how does that part go down? Like, is it clear who's there to just like booty call, or is it not clear?
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, some apps are more for booty call than others. I've never been on Tinder, but I hear that one is a little more like geared for that.
Okay.
Some people are really upfront about it, on their profiles. Other people, you start chatting and then you ask, so what's your intention here? I'm really over like the whole, one night just sort of hooking up and having sex thing. I mean, it was kind of a good thing to sort of to do because again, as a young person, I never did that. Part of my good girl way of being was definitely not, that was not part of it at all.
Yeah.
That would have been in the slut category, and I was not going to be a slut. Now I'm
not
like,
until
yeah, bring on the slut.
Later.
Like I didn't realize.
And I say that in an endearing way, of course.
Totally.
Like,
and I actually refer to myself in that way. Like I joke around. I have a couple of, friends that I share my journey with. And one of them I had told a couple years ago, like, I think I'm going to take some lovers. She was like,
"Excuse me?
You're going to take some lovers, are you? Okay." I was like, "Yes. What do you think about this?" And it's really wonderful. Like, taking lovers is a wonderful thing. And I think that there have been times in human history, and there are places around the world where this is just okay and normal. And again, why it's not in our culture is because of our conditioning. I have to be safe. I need to be careful. I need to know who the humans are. I always get a name. I always Google them. I get a phone number. I tell my friends, or at least a friend if I'm meeting someone for the first time and I've never
Oh,
met them
nice.
before. So I do all those things to keep myself safe. But then also I have a really good time, and I trust my
Yeah.
instincts. And
So is this filling up your cup? Is
oh my
this
God, it's
doing the
so
thing that you had
yummy.
hoped? Oh,
It
yes.
totally is. And I'm not going to say it doesn't come with challenges. It certainly does, especially right now in the pandemic. I'm having less sex in the last few weeks than I've had in the last year, and that fucking sucks.
Yeah, pandemic for you
um,
is bummer because you're isolated with no one.
but I have beautiful lovers. I have a man who's a filmmaker in LA who's just so creative and artistic, and I love like hearing about his world and what he's doing and his work. And I got to see his work recently, and it was amazing.
Oh,
Um, And I have an Italian man who is this amazing father in the state adjacent to mine, and he like literally grew up in Italy, and
wow.
he cooks for me, and he's just like so fabulous. He's in an open marriage.
Oh, wow.
That's my first relationship where like the other person is in a marriage. Everybody else that I've been engaging with is either like single or, just is poly and has like, is upfront about, having multiple partners. And
Oh, wow. So will you meet his spouse? Or is this like they each get to do separate things and then they come back together at the end of the day without those people?
I don't know, like he's teaching me a lot about being poly because he has been for a long time and he's also been married for about 8 years.
Okay.
And she's not, she's monogamous. And so there's some, asymmetry there, in that
Oh,
relationship that
interesting.
he has to be, really mindful of. And he seems to be really good with it. She just she doesn't have the desire. She doesn't want to be. Their kids are little, like they're aged like 10 months to 6 years, which is insanity
Oh,
for me
wow.
that like, I'm like, how can you even engage when there's all these like needs with your family, and he hasn't for a long time actually. He hadn't had any relationships for a while, and is just sort of getting back into wanting to have another relationship
Yeah.
because he's been doing what he's been doing as a dad, and he's a great dad, and he's been really wanting to be around and be mindful, but they made the decision together that and she's okay with it. So I'm like, okay.
All
It makes me feel a
right.
little like I'm not so sure about this, but
Yeah.
he said that she may be, open to that in the future. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's just a whole new world. He calls it kitchen table poly, where, or it's called kitchen table poly, where, people have, relationships and partners, but they also are like, they might be friends with their partner's, wife
Oh,
or whatever,
wow.
and, or you help each other with your kids, or you, whatever, you sort of become like an auntie, and, yeah, so it's like this
Wow.
whole new world that I think is, to me, it's just freaking cool. Like people
Yeah.
can actually live however they want, and as long as everybody who's engaging is giving consent for it and is okay with it, then what the fuck does the rest of the world care what they do? You know what I
Well,
mean? Like
that's how I
just like
always feel. My husband and I will sometimes we'll see something on Netflix or watch a show and then get into a conversation about it. And he has this take on it that he thinks every open marriage ends with somebody getting bludgeoned and somebody getting murdered or something. And I'm like, how is this if both people are open to this and then all the people involved, why can't this happen? But I think the thing that we always come back to when we talk about it is you don't know until you've gone too far, which I think is the
yeah.
scary part. Is so right, like you could be like, well, I want to get some clarity, so I'm going to go off with this other person and my spouse is okay with it. And then what if that changes everything? I think that that's the fear for people is what you can't unscramble an egg.
Yep.
Once it's done, it's done, and I think that that is the huge risk for people and what people are scared about.
Yeah, and I get it. And I also see that if you don't ever do it, then what?
Right.
Then also what? There's a negative potential there too, right? Or
Right.
I mean, either road has its things, and you don't know. Like again, I'll David White, he always has so many words of wisdom for me. But, one of the poems that he writes, it talks about the road that's seen and then unseen. And no matter which path, you're taking or whatever it is you're choosing, you don't know exactly. I mean, you might think if you're in a monogamous relationship and in a marriage that if you just keep choosing that you're going to see the path. But
Yeah.
that's naivete too, right? That's just
Right.
us believing that what the world has sold us is the truth. And anything can happen tomorrow or today.
Right.
A
Yes.
point being what we're living through right now.
Exactly.
We just don't know. And so I think it's whatever people decide, choose it from that place in your heart right now that's telling you what to lean into. Which one feels more open and joyous and like it's bringing you just space and excitement and for me anyways, that's where I'm going to move from. And if it's feeling constricted and it's feeling rigid and it's feeling fearful, then that probably isn't the road that I want to go down, because either one, I don't know what's going to happen. Right. And so
Right.
that's
Of
how I try
course.
to discern it. And I think with this particular thing, with being poly, if people are exploring that or wanting to explore having an open relationship, yes, there's unknown, there's risk. There's risk to getting up in the morning. There's risk to getting in our car. There's risk to bring a baby into the world. There's risk to doing everything that we do, and my relationship, my marriage is not what I thought it would be at the outset at this point. I mean, certainly I didn't go into it intending for it to not be what it was, but what it is, because we're still married, but what that relationship is, even if we do end up getting divorced, is it's authentic and it's he and I loving each other for who we are.
Mm.
And that's what I want to choose. That's what I want to
Yeah.
choose,
Wow. And that
you
goes
know?
back to the point that you made about the marriage changes, but the family doesn't. And so, which is,
Yeah, we're
I
still a
just think,
family,
yeah, I just think that those two things, people think they go hand in hand. And I think you're such a great example of how no, these things can be separate. So do you think you'll get bored with, I mean, I don't know that you'll ever get bored with all the fabulous sex, but do you think you'll ever get bored with having lovers? And do you think you'll ever want commitment or marriage ever again? How do you foresee that going?
I mean, right now, I definitely feel like I won't want marriage ever again. But I do think that I may move into a space where I want more of a primary relationship. I may want to have someone that I like live with, and that's a primary relationship that I can engage with really deeply and is like my regular thing. Because
Yeah.
on some levels, I do miss that. But I don't need it right now. I don't want it right now. There's other things that I'm trying to explore in my life, like my professional, being and who I am, that I feel like engaging in a relationship like that would just be, taking up a little bit too much time and energy. And I don't really want to be, focusing on that.
Yes. Right.
So this is really working for me beautifully right now to be learning about other humans. And again, it's not just the sex, like that's a huge, beautiful, wonderful part of it, but especially you know, I mean, I'm learning about Italy and Italian food. I'm learning about filmmaking. I'm learning about, I have another lover who's a coach, like a professional, he does like leadership stuff and we have great conversations. So I'm like, I'm in this place of exploring and I want to meet people and I want to do it not just in like friendships, but I like the intimate part of it. I like the physical connection if that fits for us, and I like the sexual piece. And, so the few people that I'm engaging with right now, I think I'm feeling finally at a place like this past year it was like going to a buffet and,
Yes.
like,
I
oh
was
yeah,
going to
this is
say, it's
good. Nope,
like,
that's not,
yeah,
I don't like that.
it's like you're
But
at a
now,
library. I was getting this
yeah,
image of you at a library, that you're like, I'm learning all these things. Like, I pick up this book about Italians and then I get to have sex with it. And then it teaches me about Italian cooking. And that's a great book. It's like the sex library, is you are a member
yeah.
of.
It's so good. And I'm learning about my body, and it's being brought to places that I never imagined. I mean, I knew that my body and sexually that I had this potential to experience pleasure. Like it was always there, but it was never tapped,
Yeah.
and now
Wow.
it's being tapped. And I hope that, at the very least, that there are people in the world who can see that exploring the sexual well-being within ourselves is number one, it's super interconnected to our whole self. It's not like I
Right.
just went on this journey about sex. Like, it led me to all these other huge awarenesses and led me to being able to be really honest with myself about a lot of things and explore, the beauty of who I am as a whole being. And that also, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do it with my map, and you don't have to do it with a monogamous Christian map. You can make your own. You can find your way that works for you. And the way that I'm doing it isn't necessarily the way that everybody should be doing it, but it's also okay that it's happening for me in my way.
Yes. Right. It's like
So,
everybody can be doing the thing that feels most fulfilling to them. But the whole point is to figure out and be authentic and truthful about what is fulfilling to you. That's,
that's
and
right.
not leaving that part of you like to wither and die. And if that's
Yes.
whatever is an important part of you, to acknowledge it and figure out and have conversation about, hey, how do I get this part back that I really need? That's really
Yeah.
integral to my entire being. I think that's such a powerful piece. And I so appreciate you coming here and being so open and sharing with us about all of this, because I think it speaks to so many of the listeners, and what they do with this information is their own choice. But like all of the podcasts, I feel like they give little seeds for people, seeds of conversation, seeds of just thought, and to explore these things within themselves, and then also in conversation with maybe their partner or spouse. So Nora, I'm really grateful for you for being open to talking about this. When I said, would you ever want to come on the podcast, I didn't know if you would feel comfortable sharing, but I'm so appreciative that you did, because I think more people need to be talking about these things, so that, especially women at home, aren't just wondering, am I the only one that feels this way? Am I the only one who feels like I'm lacking in this spot? And then what do I do? And what does it look like for other women who've made choices that maybe I'm scared to make? Okay, well, maybe I don't want to make that choice. Maybe I do. So you're giving some, your personal stories are giving sort of a face, or at least a voice to this. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm really happy to do it, and to give the message that you can do it in your way, and it doesn't have to be maybe how you've seen it already happen in the world or how you see it on TV.
Yeah.
You can write your own story.
Coincidentally, while I edited this episode, I was reading Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed. And there was so much crossover between that book and what Nora was saying here on the podcast. And I wanted to read a passage from Glennon's book that so closely ties into what Nora and I have been talking about. So this is from page 128. As I looked deep into my own eyes, the woman in the mirror and I had a reckoning. I asked myself, is the decision to continue abandoning yourself really what your children need from you? Mothers have martyred themselves in their children's names since the beginning of time. We have lived as if she who disappears the most loves the most. We have been conditioned to prove our love by slowly ceasing to exist. Dude, what a terrible burden for children to bear, to know that they are the reason their mother stopped living. What a terrible burden for our daughters to bear, to know that if they choose to become mothers, this will be their fate too. Because if we show them that being a martyr is the highest form of love, that is what they will become. They will feel obligated to love as well as their mothers loved, after all. They will believe they have permission to live only as fully as their mothers allowed themselves to live. If we keep passing down the legacy of martyrdom to our daughters, with whom does it end? Which woman ever gets to live? And when does the death sentence begin? At the wedding altar? In the delivery room? Whose delivery room? Our children's or our own? When we call martyrdom love, we teach our children that when love begins, life ends. This is why Jung suggested there is no greater burden on a child than the unlived life of a parent. What if love is not the process of disappearing for the beloved, but of emerging for the beloved? What if a mother's responsibility is teaching her children that love does not lock the lover away, but frees her? What if a responsible mother is not one who shows her children how to slowly die, but how to stay wildly alive until the day she dies? What if the call of motherhood is not to be a martyr, but to be a model? Right there, on the floor, I looked deep into my own eyes. I let the knowing rise and stay. My children do not need me to save them. My children need to watch me save myself. Yeah, so there's that part of the book. And I want to be clear that I'm not advocating for everyone to go blow up their lives or marriages. This isn't a push to divorce your spouse, but more an awakening about feeding yourself rather than only feeding everyone else. And that can be done in marriages that are built on mutual respect and willingness to learn by both people. Or perhaps the rules need to change. And I'm not specifically talking about the who we have sex with rules, but the rules we create in each of our specific family and marriage cultures. Instead of moms solely thinking about the family members' needs, moms' livelihoods need to be a priority too. Hey, hi, if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, or better yet, a review. As always, thanks for listening.